NASA's Orion space capsule is flaming garbage. And these are not my words, but I agree with the sentiment from Casey Handmer. This over 50-page article or blog was released on Halloween, and it's making the rounds on social media, and it has a lot of great talking points. And right now, I think it's a good time to talk about it because we're at a time of transition within NASA once again. Jared Isaacman, as many of you know, was re-nominated by President Trump. He still has yet to be confirmed, but Secretary Duffy will soon be out, and hopefully Jared will soon be in to make some changes. One of those changes that a lot of people are supporting is the idea of canceling Orion. And there's many reasons to cancel Orion before it cancels someone else. That's right, in this article, one of the main reasons is the safety concern with the heat shield. Casey Handmer wrote, "Did you know that NASA's Orion program has spent over $30 billion in 20 years and still hasn't flown people, has a fundamentally unsafe heat shield, hasn't tested life support yet, is too heavy to go to the moon or pretty much anywhere? Why are we putting this useless boondoggle on the critical path for the Artemis program? 1,400 days until China takes the moon, 12,000 juicy words below." And if you think that Casey is exaggerating the danger, then tell me why former astronaut Charles Camarda, who reflew after the Columbia disaster on STS-114, has also been sounding the alarm about Orion and how unsafe he feels it is for the fated crew. I interviewed Charlie Camarda in January, and here's a little clip from that interview. You are very persistent, it seems, about getting your message out. What is your worst fear with Artemis if your message isn't heard in time?
What is it? That we lose the crew. We lose the crew. So the same people that are making the decisions for Artemis, some of those same people are on those teams that made very bad decisions during Columbia.
And just to clarify, my understanding, because I've been following not only the NASA press conferences about what's going on with Artemis, but also Starliner, my understanding is that with everything that happened to the Orion heat shield, their plan is to move forward and keep the heat shield as is. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's what's crazy. And so
crazy to me, and I'm not technically savvy like you.
It is crazy to everyone, and it makes absolutely no sense. And I was begging them not to do this.
But let's get back to my interview with Casey.
Well, my name's Casey Handmer, and I'm the founder and CEO of Terraform Industries. But prior to this, I worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, where I worked on some pretty unprestigious at least, software, system architecture related to GPS and a few other things. But I've always been a huge space nerd, just obsessed for my entire life. Actually, when I was 9 years old, I attended a lecture by Dr. Robert Zubrin about the case of Mars, which I think got me going in Australia. It's pretty kind of rural backwater space location back then. And actually just a month or so ago, I took my 7-year-old son to the Mars Society convention and offered up the next generation as tribute, which was a nice experience. But yeah, I've been at it for a while.
That's awesome. And so you're not at JPL anymore?
No. Just to be clear, I actually, yesterday was the 4th birthday of my startup, and I never represented NASA's official opinions, but I especially don't now.
But you have a lot of opinions, so I definitely want to get into those. Congratulations,
oh, yeah, for sure.
By the way. So yeah, let's talk about, because as you've stated in your article, you've been very vocal about your disdain for SLS and also Orion. And I think one of the issues, I've actually talked to an astronaut, Charlie Camarda, who flew on the shuttle after the Columbia disaster, and he's been sounding the alarm on how dangerous he feels that the Orion capsule is. So, you're not alone in trying to spread awareness about this, but talk about what you ultimately hope to achieve with writing a over 50-page article.
Yeah, 50 pages. I guess it came out at about 12,000 words. I don't have a whole lot of time, so when I write blogs, I basically just sit down and grind them out until they're done. But that one took a couple of days, or a couple of overnights, I should say, of work. Obviously, a lot of ideas have been bouncing around in my head for a long time, and I would say that, like, within the space community, there's pretty broadly felt dissatisfaction with the state of NASA's rocket development and space capsule program, which is in competition with multiple commercial providers at this point. And by competition, I mean if it was a fair fight, they would have lost a long time ago. But the government can never really go out of business, can it? I've always been a great fan of big review articles that kind of listed in arbitrary levels of detail with citations and stuff, all the key pieces of information you might need in order to get up to speed on something. And really, I never found that for SLS. And about 4 years ago, I wrote a post that I think remains fairly definitive, at least on the program up to that date. I wrote a couple of updates since then. And but I said Orion is kind of too slippery for me right now, so I left that on its own. And in the meantime, there are plenty of other things to write about. And I should add that like 95% of what I write about on my blog is usually pretty positive, celebratory, pro like tech stuff, or just weird stuff in general. But I think with NASA, fundamentally I'm offended that that this agency that represents so much that is good about America and good about the cause of freedom in the world is so inaccessible and so poorly run in some ways. And I really want it to be better, right? And I really think it should be better, and it could be run better, and the people within it could run a much better program. But I think it's just a really good illustrative example of how things can go off the rails if no one's really forcing things to work properly. So yeah, Orion finally bubbled up, and I think this was incited in part by, I'd say going on more than 10 years now, effort by the pro old space guard at NASA. So I should add that like NASA's project, right, like SLS Orion is not actually being built by NASA. It's being built by their old contractors, the old primes, under old-fashioned cost plus high-price contracts. And of course, they have pretty strong ability to lobby and so on. And there's just been a bit of chit-chat over the last year saying, you know, what Kathy leaders did for the HLS program is kind of fundamentally, silly, and we should do what we did for Apollo all over again, but maybe a little bit bigger. And we should hand the contract to the trusted primes because they know what they're doing. And I just thought, look, it's fine to have an opinion, but like the scoreboard shows that these primes are not what they once were, and that NASA, their customer, is not forcing them in the right direction, and that they've already spent $100 billion of our money, and all they've managed to build for their efforts are by far the most expensive, lowest flight rate rocket ever conceived of or built. It's literally the thing that only the United States could build, and only on a very bad day. And also a space capsule that is like, it's perfect match. It's too heavy, and it's got a whole bunch of broken systems that don't work properly, and it's cost tens of billions of dollars, and it's been going for 20 years and still hasn't flown with people and probably never should. And the heat shield is fundamentally badly designed. And everyone who's, just like, there's no consistency in terms of program management. And even the senior Lockheed Martin executive who runs that whole project was quoted on tape more than 10 years ago saying, this is no way to run a program. And yet here we are. Mm-hmm. It just offends me. It offends me. I think we could be far further along and be doing far more stuff and far more safely and in ways that are far more accessible to the American taxpayer and people all over the world. It's not merely academic. It's really important that when NASA flies with the US flag, painted on the side of the space shuttle or whatever spacecraft are flying nowadays, it embodies the pinnacle of the technological achievement of the kind of Western liberal order. And it's very important that they succeed. Right? It's just as important they succeed today that they succeeded in the 1960s to show the world that the Soviet model, or now the Chinese Communist Party model, is not the model that humanity should aspire to. And yet, it is not being run as though success was mandatory, to put it mildly.
You know how sometimes you'll spend months to plan something that could have just taken minutes to start? I know I've been guilty of this before, but thankfully I finally got my act together and spent some time building a proper website, but not as much time as you may think. I've been wanting a website to promote my channel Ellie in Space for a while now, but it's been sitting on the back burner. Partly because I don't know how to code, I'm not a web developer, and I don't exactly have that much time to dedicate to learning how to build a website. Then I found Framer, and this literally blew my mind. You just type what you want, and then it builds the site for you. I typed in something like, I'm a YouTuber covering SpaceX and Starship. Build me a site with an about section, a page for my videos, and a place to submit a contact form. I hit enter, and within seconds, I had a full site layout ready to customize. Like, what? Since then, I've actually taken some more time to start building it out, adding photos and videos, some of my favorite interviews, links to my channel, merchandise, and more, and I think it's starting to come together really nicely. What's cool about Framer is it doesn't feel like those clunky drag and drop builders. It's smooth, visual, and actually feels like you're designing, not just wrestling boxes around on a grid. So this is my progress so far, and the fact that it started from one text prompt still blows my mind. If you've been putting off building your own site, whether it's for your brand, your small business, or your weirdly specific passion project, just start. Framer makes it insanely easy. Ready to build a site that looks hand-coded without hiring a developer? You can launch your site for free at framer.com. And if you use my code ellieinspace, you'll get a free month of Framer Pro. Thanks so much to Framer for sponsoring this video. I'm going to link your article for people to read, but I don't know how many points it would take to like summarize, but it seems like there's, a couple main issues that you have, including like how safe is this thing? Should humans really fly in it in next year? Probably not. It seems like the aftermath of Flight 1 was sort of covered up from us for a while of how bad it really was. Also there's seems to be some blatant lying within the capabilities of both, for
sure.
So it's like there's lying, there's delays, it's a waste of money, there's the safety issues. So I don't know if you want to just hit on like some of your, most important things you'd like the audience to know about why you're kind of just hope that the program, I don't know, I guess you wanted to end or.
Yeah, I mean, realistically speaking, it should have been allowed to die in 2009 when Obama first pulled the plug. I mean, like everyone back then knew like this is not going to work. But, I think understandably, the congressional representatives in the space states said, well, okay, fine, but like I have a workforce here and they depend on government money to fund their communities. And some of these areas, like parts of Alabama have, effectively tens of billions of government money going into their cities on a yearly basis to fund a variety of things, NASA and other agencies as well. And I don't want to, lay off the entirety of the space community or something, but like at the same time, if you're going to take these thousands of brilliant people who want to work on space stuff, like, and just employ them, why not just have them digging holes and filling them in again, right? And if you think, well, that's beneath their dignity, then don't make them work on some project, which is the logical equivalent to digging holes and filling them in again. Have them work on a project where they can actually point to it and say, this actually moved the state of the human condition forward by, the decades equivalent to what we worked on it. But this is a project where failure is overdetermined. Failure, it's always easy to say failure is monocausal, right? And why did Japan ultimately not prevail in the Second World War? You could point at any one thing, but really, like the reality is that Imperial Japan made hundreds of unforced errors, and any 5 of them would have been enough. And you see the same thing in this project, right? It's misery loves company, and on every single axis you'd care to measure, this project is not only underperforming, it's underperforming to an extent that's downright dangerous for the people who will fly on this thing. It has this kind of side effect that I've come to appreciate in recent years, where an organization where like one part of it is allowed to rot and fester is an organization where other parts ultimately become allowed to rot and fester. You can't isolate the damage. You can't kind of keep the gangrene off only in one corner. And so actually what we've seen is NASA's other major programs, even the ones that have not been kind of sloped up by one of the major cost plus prime contractors and then kind of milked for all they're worth, have also kind of abandoned all pretense at adherence to any kind of cost or schedule discipline, which is a real problem because unlike the human spaceflight components, these programs do eventually hit a funding wall and then get cancelled or delayed indefinitely. It's just heartbreaking. I know dozens and dozens of people at JPL have given their entire lives to working on projects, and they finally get one over the line, and then the program management's just not there for the follow through, and they end up retiring or dying of old age before their project gets to fly. This is not a future we want to sell to America's best and brightest. It should be a place where we get stuff done quickly and decisively. It's appropriate to probably cheer 2/3 to 3/4 of the time, and 1/4 of the time you've really got to have a close look at what's going wrong. And I would not have written the Orion blog post if someone else had written it, right? Like there's no need for that if someone else had already done it, but no one had done it. And I thought, well, I have an unusual position here in that I have a degree of familiarity with the material and a degree of insight, because I worked at NASA for a while, and also a lifelong interest in the technical minutiae of these sort of systems and system failure and how things work and how things don't work and the many ways in which things can go wrong. Maybe I am the right person, at least in the English-speaking world, to write this article, and certainly I was the one on the day who pressed publish first. I encourage other people to jump in, and to be sure, plenty of detractors have said, well, this article's full of lies or it's not accurate or whatever. I said, great. Many of my friends have said, oh, you fudged a figure here, or there's a mistake over there, or a typographical error here. If you have a look at the edit history of that article, I probably put out 20 edits in the first 48 hours, just to fix the issues that I missed on the first and second pass. That's fine. And I will say right now to people who think that no, Orion and SLS are in fact the shining pinnacle of human technological achievement, write that article, right? And if it's not obviously cancerous, I will link it right up top of my article. I'll say here's the opposing point of view. Go and collect your information. You can decide. Sometimes you have to stand up for a particular point of view and then argue it to the best of your ability. I was a debater in high school, and you never knew which side of the debate you would get until a minute before, and then you have to stand up and make the case. But I think I would really struggle to make a case that Orion is the best we can do. There's not a single rocket in the US pantheon of rockets that can get this capsule anywhere near the moon. This alleged capsule for going to the moon, and there's not even a lunar lander involved. Right? It's shocking. It's really appalling. It makes me quite angry, in case you hadn't gathered that. It makes a lot of other people angry as well. And I think the US taxpayers have the right to demand better.
I'm going to link the article in the description of this video because it is way too long to completely summarize, but he makes some amazing points. It's also a very entertaining read. Casey writes, Orion is superfluous. Not only does it not have a reference mission, we don't need it to go to the moon and never have. Its presence in the program only adds a bewildering array of additional marginal requirements that drive the program further from any chance of success. Insanely expensive, an incredible boondoggle. It spends more in a year than SpaceX spent in total on its first space capsule, twice as much. Delayed well beyond the point of sanity. Back in 2013, it was already running so far behind schedule that no serious space exploration architectures could put it on the critical path. To have imagined then that 12 years later it would still not have flown humans. Irredeemably unsafe. The systems engineering was compromised from the beginning. The most obvious symptom of this rot is the unfixable, fundamentally flawed heat shield, but nearly every other subsystem is unstable, untested, and unfit. And then he puts in an Elon Musk quote saying the biggest mistake that smart engineers will make is to optimize something, a part or process that should not exist. Elon Musk literally every day of his life. How does SpaceX do it? They employ the algorithm. 1. Question all requirements, tie them back to a responsible individual by name. 2. Delete unnecessary parts and processes. Delete until the rate of adding back equals the rate of deletion. 3. Simplify, optimize. 4. Accelerate cycle time. 5. Automate. This post forms a good roadmap for step 1 and makes it extremely clear which parts of the Artemis program are dead weight. Delete without mercy. Prioritization doesn't count until it hurts. Something must be given up for success to occur. Finally, in the words of a wise man, slow is fake. It's not a coincidence that the most expensive capsule development programs are also slow, error-ridden, and diverging from success. We have now run the experiment. Urgency and accountability drive success. Endless process and layers of bureaucracy guarantee failure. SLS and Orion do not meet NASA's internal safety standards, and it's not even close. Even with 10 successful uncrewed test flights, fundamentally flawed designs would not create enough statistical certainty on safety, and instead NASA proposes to fly Artemis 2 with people around the moon, a uniquely demanding mission and a unique configuration with a heat shield design and life support system that has never been tested before. It is quite something to have managed to engineer a spacecraft even more dangerous than Shuttle, but NASA, Boeing, and Lockheed have done it. Once again, NASA is rolling the dice on tragedy and national humiliation. Even if SLS and Orion meet NASA's safety standards, their extreme expense, schedule delays, and unprofessional program management exclude them from serious consideration as a system, which poses a meaningful threat to the Chinese domination of the moon. In no universe could any program executed in the contemptuously slipshod manner of Orion even approach convergence to success. We don't need to theorize about this. We have 20 years of evidence before our eyes. Orion has failed. Now let it die before it kills us. And Elon Musk even commented on this post saying, sounds problematic. Casey replied saying, do you know a better way to get to the moon? Elon didn't answer, but Elon has come out publicly recently saying that, mark his words, SpaceX will end up doing the entire moon mission by themselves. You know, Elon talked recently about maybe doing it all on their own, just a SpaceX only mission. And when I interviewed him, I tried to kind of ask him about that. He didn't really want to like expand upon that, but now he's kind of coming out saying it publicly, I think, with all of the stuff that Sean Duffy has done with maybe reopening the contract for HLS. And so what do you think about that concept of just SpaceX maybe is the only one capable, or, you know, it'll be cheaper if SpaceX does it? Do you think that's a good idea?
Yeah, I wrote a post about this a couple of years ago, basically saying Starship can save Project Artemis, right? Because it was just clear that, like, I mean, it was clear enough to me in 2013 that SLS and Orion aren't going to get anywhere near the moon. So you need a landing system, and if the landing system can get to the moon on its own, then you can delete everything else, right? And Elon has said many times he's not the first person to invent this, but like the algorithm is you question all requirements and you delete unnecessary parts and processes. And it turns out that if you have a Starship that can drop 100 tons of cargo on the moon, then like a human is a lot less than 100 tons, right? Mm-hmm. And everything they could possibly want is a lot less than 100 tons. The Dragon capsule itself is about 12 tons or something like that. So you can actually just put the Dragon capsule inside the Starship, and still have room for like 6 more of them, and fly the whole thing to the moon, land, and then fly back. And there are probably half a dozen different ways you could consider doing this that might be faster or cheaper or better in some way. But the key thing is, if you have the Starship, all that is possible. And if you don't have the Starship, then you're basically left with the next best thing, which is, Blue Origin's lander, which is, I think, quite respectable in its own way once we see it fly, maybe early next year, but a considerably smaller scale. I think much more in common with the original Apollo landers. It's kind of funny, actually. I was just thinking about this. I didn't make it into the blog post, but part of the reason that Orion is such flaming garbage is that it was designed without a reference mission. So it's kind of a Winnebago. It had a bit of everything, which resulted in the cost bloat. And it's kind of lack of mission and lack of ability to execute on any of those missions. The Starship does actually have a reference mission. Its reference mission is to transport enormous volumes of cargo to Mars, and ultimately to be able to fly small volumes of people back from Mars should they wish to come. That is such a transformationally different and more difficult mission that something as trivial as launching large volumes of satellites to low Earth orbit or transporting humans to and from the moon is well within its scope. So yeah, it seems fairly clear to me that when Starship is up and running, that it would provide the capacity to operate something like the Antarctic program on the moon for roughly the same budget. We're talking a few $1 billion a year, which could be run out of the NSF. NSF could contract SpaceX directly for transportation services. They could contract NASA and NASA's contractors for construction of hardware to go on the surface of the moon, which actually is kind of how I think about this. I think that there are many excellent engineers at NASA, and they should not be spending their life, and at NASA's contractors, they should not be spending their life working on projects that are based on technology that's 50 years old. They should be thinking, well, Starship is going to happen sooner or later. Which part of the piece of the moon base is my NASA center going to build? Which part are we going to build to make sure we're part of the story? And there's plenty of stuff to be done. There's habitation modules, and there's lunar rovers and mining rigs and drill rigs and environmental control life support systems and all kinds of cool stuff to be built.
It seems like a lot of people that I interact with in the space community, they are, definitely pro SpaceX, and they're not huge fans of Artemis, but they think that we should at least get through the first 3 missions and then maybe dump it. But it sounds like maybe you're worried that even if they do this flyby, those astronauts will not be safe on Artemis 2. Do you think that they should even do Artemis 2?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, so the Artemis program could quite easily switch to Starship or Blue Origin or both tomorrow, right?
Right.
Like the thing that's infuriating about SLS and Orion is that they're surplus to requirements. You could delete them and it would not really change anything as far as the Artemis program goes. if you wanted to run some kind of free return trajectory return around the moon, like Apollo 8, but without the low lunar orbits, you could do it with a Falcon Heavy and a Dragon capsule at maybe 1/50th of the cost and 1/10th of the risk tomorrow, right? Quite literally. Now, you ask, what about Orion and safety? I know Charlie Kamada is deeply concerned about this, and I share his concerns. NASA's internal standards for safety are 1 in 270 or thereabouts. So if there's a 1 in 270 chance of loss of crew, loss of mission, then that's too dangerous. And that's the standard that they apply to their commercial providers. And I think that SpaceX is in that ballpark. But it's important to realize that the space shuttle program ran between about 1 in 10 and 1 in 90 chance of loss of crew, loss of mission. And over 135 flights, we lost 2. So we probably got lucky, all things considered. And that the Apollo missions themselves ran at about 1 in 6 chance. And we had, of the 7 flights, we had Apollo 13, which was a real squeaker. Right? Yeah. It could quite clearly, like a minute either way in some cases, and it would have been death. So really, really, really close. And so the question kind of falls into the bucket of like, well, how dangerous is Orion and SLS actually? And I think the answer is something like 1 in 10. Okay, so you can go and talk to the astronauts. I haven't spoken to them personally, who are in line to fly Artemis 2, and they will say, well, my job is to accept risk on behalf of the United States government, and I'm not the PR department, obviously. And they're all like psychotically brave, square-jawed ex-test pilot individuals, right? And they understand that they're part of a grander story. And I think that it's a huge credit to the quality and the strength of the US astronaut corps that they will stick their hand up, knowing that there's a huge gap between what NASA says is officially the risk and what the actual risk they're accepting is. And I think Charlie Kamada has spoken about that personally himself in regards to the return to flight after Columbia, right? Because he rolled those dice, right? And plenty of astronauts have rolled those dice. I mean, there's been 600 or 700 people in space by this point in orbit, and on the order of 20 people have died in space. So not super safe. And so you can say, well, I guess we can roll the dice. There's 90% chance. It's better than even odds. I'd say the odds are slightly worse than like an unassisted first birth of a young mother, something like that. But is that something we want to subject these people to? Just so we say we could, just to like cover our embarrassment for having engineered the system so badly, and what would the look be like if these guys did make it home safely? But when they fished the Orion capsule out of the water, we find the heat shield did burn most of the way through, or all the way through in some cases, or like what happened in I think Soyuz 1 or something, where I can't remember if it was Komarov or one of the other cosmonauts that basically burned up on reentry, right, on live radio, right? Is that something that we want? And I think that like the risk is not just to the astronauts, and it's not just the astronauts' call on this. It's not just their decision to risk their lives in service of a greater goal once or twice, right? Which is, again, as I said, like an honorable decision to make. It's also like, if the United States is standing up as a bastion of freedom and democracy for the people of the world in comparison to China, whose space agency openly drops spent boosters on disposable villages downrange, and then they strap their own astronauts into a capsule that everyone knows, as well as you and I do, is like rolling the dice, like literally rolling the dice. If you get snake eyes, you're out. Does that really say that we're any better? Does that really uphold the ideals of American excellence and commitment to truth?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think so. So I think that cooler heads should prevail, and they should say, well, what could we be spending $20 million a day on that's worth more than this? And it's a very, very long list. And take the existing hardware and put it in a museum at Johnson Space Center or Kennedy Space Center, right? And say, we have spent 20 years working on this, and we decided not to throw it into the ocean at the cost of $5 billion. We put it here as a warning to future engineers, not to over-engineer systems that can't work properly.
I like
and
that.
go and enjoy your flight to space, right? The Museum of Bad Ideas.
Yeah.
Right? And sure, a few people get to take their lumps. But I wrote a blog post naming a particular kind of organizational dysfunction that NASA made famous, Dittermore's Law, after the flight director who thumbs up Columbia. Right? And obviously Kamada is still traumatized in some way by this whole exercise. I'd much rather that a few program managers felt awkward for a few weeks about the fact that their rocket was unceremoniously canceled and then put in a museum as an example to others, than that they get paraded in front of Congress in 12 months to say, we did it again, congratulations, everyone. We're 4 astronauts poorer than we were before, and for no good reason. Right? It's a completely different thing if it's for a good reason, but it's not for a good reason.
Are you worried about there being big consequences if China beats us to the moon. I mean, we've already been to the moon. We've done the flags and footprints mission. So, like, what is the danger if we get beat by China? Is there really a danger?
I mean, I think in the grand scheme of things, that the danger from the Chinese government is mostly focused on the Taiwan Strait rather than the moon. But the space industry's part in that is to make sure that the technological and economic might of the United States is upheld in that domain. And I wasn't alive in 1958, but it was a huge shock when the Soviet Union, who a mere 10 years before had basically knuckled under in response to the Berlin airlift, managed to lob a gigantic spacecraft over our heads that could have contained a nuclear weapon. It went beep beep beep, and the United States couldn't even successfully launch a rocket. They kept blowing up Vanguard rockets left and right. A huge shock. And in response to that, we formed NASA and DARPA and a few other agencies. And their mission essentially was never again. And NASA's part of that, DARPA's mission is no more surprises. And NASA's part of that is the back page of the US passport, a solemn promise to those in the American sphere, including myself, that the skies and the future will belong to free people and people who are able to exercise the freedoms we take for granted. And I mean, I personally think the moon is a bit of a backwater, right? It's like Antarctica. It's not a place you really want to build some gigantic city, but it is symbolic. It's incredibly symbolic. It's something that every human sees. Comes up every day. And there absolutely should be a US base there, a US funded and operated base there that is open to all comers, like the International Space Station. And yes, the Russians can join us there. And yes, the Chinese can join us there with open arms, and sit around a big table and share the Thanksgiving turkey or whatever else. Right. And that's kind of the model for international cooperation in space. But I don't think that the Chinese have this particular propaganda kind of feat in mind in terms of strengthening the claim of all humanity to these kind of universal ideals. And, I think, I don't watch much TV, but For All Mankind kind of underscored that in one of their first episodes when in that alternative universe, United States was beaten soundly back to the moon. Yeah. I think it is important, and I also think that given that the Artemis Accords were kind of put in place in 2016 or maybe it was 2017 to kind of weaken some of the no land acquisition provisions of the Outer Space Treaty and potentially enable the United States to establish like a local sovereignty over the lunar South Pole. It'd be pretty freaking funny if China got back there first and said, well, thanks for that. These are ours now. Enjoy playing in the other parts of the moon that don't have all the cool stuff. Like, to lose that badly, we would have to want to lose. Do you understand? To lose that badly, we would have to want to lose. And yet, if you look at the way the US crewed space program is being run, it's being run by people who apparently do not care if we lose.
I was going to say, if we don't change anything about the current trajectory, don't you think we will lose? I mean, everything is so unbelievably behind schedule.
If we do not lose, it will not be because of SLS and Orion. That's for sure, right? Like, it'll be despite them, right? And it's one of the reasons I say let's stop pouring gasoline on the fire and making it harder, right? And like Secretary Duffy's remarks recently that SpaceX was somehow slowing down the lunar return program were obviously talking points put into his hand by someone who did not have his best interests at heart. And that he personally didn't understand the significance of. If SpaceX didn't exist, in the counterfactual world where SpaceX doesn't exist, China has already won. Because without SpaceX, China has 3/4 or 4/5 or something of the world's total launch capacity, and they're putting up more satellites than everyone else combined. If you subtract SpaceX from the equation. With SpaceX, the United States is far ahead. That's the only difference. That's the only difference. I wrote some papers about this 6 years ago when I was at NASA. Internal papers, which I later published sections of on my blog, basically pointing out that since 2015, the United States has been a launch superpower. There's never been a meaningful constraint to our ability to launch stuff into space. We've had reusable Falcon 9s, Falcon Heavies, and now we're about to have Starship. And how much did NASA's plans in terms of their crewed and robotic space exploration programs adapt to this new reality? Nothing. Not a single thing was changed. Okay, so it's been 10 years and NASA has not taken advantage of the fact that they successfully helped birth the transformational capacity that they've been dreaming about in policy papers since the late 1960s of having the ability to have dispatchable launch at a reasonable price to basically anywhere in the solar system. And here we are still screwing around with bizarre Mars sample return architectures and lunar landing, like lunar landing programs that are 20 years and $100 billion in and still haven't even like cut a check for the lunar lander. It's SLS launched lunar lander. It's absolutely bizarre. So yeah, I think the matter speaks for itself.
Do you have faith in Jared Isaacman if he actually finally this time is confirmed? I mean, we got close in May and then here we are.
Jared's I mean, the NASA administrator is a horrible job to have, right? No one in their right mind would stick their hand up and say, pick me, okay? Because it's just, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And yet Jared, who has the level of experience and skill and interest and so on in space that we could only dream of, has stuck his hand up and said, pick me. How fortunate we are. And I don't really know exactly what he plans. He hasn't told me. But I'm sure we'll find out soon enough. And given that the default plan is guaranteed failure, I wholeheartedly support Jared and his his team in what they set out to try and do and turn this around. The amount of bargaining going on with like the amount of vigor that NASA has lost over the last 50 years, right? And the amount of blood, sweat, and tears required to get it back to anywhere near its former state is kind of mind-boggling. But I wish them the best.
And so hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you want more from this, I would definitely read the article. It's quite a long read, but you'll see exactly why I felt compelled to make a video about this. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.